what science is. That's what seeking is. So with um, with that being said, let's we look at how everybody on the planet has white blood cells. They have white nails. They have white flesh. They have white sclera as far as from their eyes. Um, all those are white. What makes a group of people call themselves white, or how do they become white? That doesn't register, and it certainly does not register for a child when you see that when they're looking at these people that call themselves that, it doesn't make any. We all know how years ago we've heard white lie. Um, what's a white lie? Why does a lie have to be considered with a color? It has no sort of reasoning. And then when you start seeing all these matters, you see that it's just a bunch of illusions. Like the whole term black on black crime. What is it black on black crime? What does that mean? What so basically it's a color on a color crime, yellow on yellow, brown on brown crime. Does that make any sense? Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So one of the things we have to realize first is to identify, and we have to get past all that, because that's how we can get some clarity, we can get verification, we can get evidential treatment for us as far as to be uprooted right. And we're dealing with that right now. Now we see that white has been signified as being whiteness or wealth. And we see that one of the things that was being picked tremendously, as a lot of us who are of the lineage of slavery in this country, United States, was cotton. Cotton was a purity. It was pure. It was one of the most wealthiest things you could ever imagine to be picked by us, that we did by force. And when this was being picked, this was the wealth, white, pure. It was a color of the cotton that we was picking, not the people. But they made themselves synonymous with that. And then now we have to be into targeting white supremacy now as we talk. But this has been going on for quite some time. And we have to really get back to knowing how to identify and knowing how to critically think about what we're saying. Because one of the things that I know that is really deep into knowing that English language can get you into a spellbinding tactic, very spellbinding. When we look at how the lettering of the word white, we see the word whiskey, we see the word when, we see the word where, we see the word what. But then when you get down to the word who, what happens? Now, for a child's sake, you see that why does who have a different saying or phonetics of that? Because that word who goes back to ancient writings in ancient Egypt. Just to be honest, you have to understand how to go back. But when you look at a child is spelling words, and then you have to figure out, well, why they're spelling words. That's where the trick is. So we can't get to our child first, or our children first, we're done. We can't get to have them to understand things from first, second, third grade, we're done. Because after that, it's just going to be a bunch of confusion, and they're not going to know where to step on so that they can understand themselves in life or in this world. All right. But without further ado, just wanted to just open that up so that we can get into our talks about one of the things that we have as far as we have our great Dr. Darity is on. Dr. Darity is of the academia. He's been in the academia for quite some time, back when we was probably little children, from the 80s. Um, he's been known for quite some time as far as doing his showcases about economics. He's a professor at the Duke University, also at the Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill. So that's quite phenomenal when you think about all that. All right, but without further ado, we're going to just go ahead and let Dr. Darity have it, and just say glad that you're on, Dr. Darity. Thank you, and
Thank
glad
you.
to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm working on the assumption that we're going to talk a bit about some of the questions that people have about the book that I did with Kirsten Mullen,
Yes, sir.
From Here to Equality.
Yes, sir.
And so I'll be glad to try to answer any questions that folks have.
All right. Let's see. We can. I know. Well, I can go into some questions. I know I've have some. I know everybody else has some too. To start off with, when we're talking about the racial wealth gap, and I know the numbers that you have stated about the 10 to 12 trillion dollars that would be of the closing the wealth gap. When I look at the word closing, is like it's not closed, but it's closing. So with any number itself will be considered closing as far as is like a door. A door is not closed, but it's closing. So with 10 to 12 trillion the dollars, as far as the specified number that you've had from study and data, that would trickle into, for the amount of millions of us that are here in the United States, about around 36 million. That's about 300,000. Is that the number I think I've heard you say? 300,000?
Something like 280,000 to 300,000 per eligible recipient. That's right.
Okay. So that's a part of closing. Okay. So let me ask you this right here.
Well, to be strictly clear, the language that I may have used in using the term closing may not have been precise enough, but it would eliminate the racial wealth differential.
Okay.
Those amounts. I mean, it would close it entirely. Okay. Now, whether or not it closes it permanently is another issue. But in the moment in which you allocate that amount of funds, you would have erased the racial wealth differential.
Okay. Because we're looking at how 300,000 and knowing that the state of what slavery has been in this country through Jim Crow, that takes a toll on our life. Just to be frank, it's like the price tag. There's not really can be a price tag for what we've been through.
No, that's absolutely correct. There can't be a price tag. But I guess, as Frederick Douglass once said, there's no way you can arrive at an amount that would fully compensate for all the atrocities that our people have been subjected to. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. And so the question is, what is that anything you should do? And we argue in our book that the anything that should be done is what would be required to eliminate the racial wealth differential in the United States. And the reason we focus on that is because we think that out of all the various economic indicators that we could use for calculating the bill, the racial wealth gap best captures the cumulative intergenerational effects of white supremacy. Certainly, there's a host of other costs that we have experienced that don't get captured in a direct way by that measure, but it strikes us as the best measure to use. We're trying to avoid taking each single atrocity and assigning a dollar value to it, what we call itemization, because we think that that's absolutely impossible to do. But what we are trying to do is to find some number that gives us an index of the full effects on our economic well-being. And it seems to be the racial wealth differential best captures that.
Okay. So because really, when you get to the talk of reparations, and so to speak, we've estimated that to be like in 3 P's: payments, policies, and protection. And for that matter, it would have to be that the the pricing or the price tag for that matter, it will have to exceed somewhat for each of us that has been in the of our lineage that has been in this country. It will have to exceed somewhere to where you won't have to have the thought about being of other people that have just come to this country, because many people that come to this country come here to work, come here to have access to funds that can go back to their own country. And that's just pretty much like how we've been as far as getting a job or a good job. But I look at the fact that we need to be at a state where we're elevated enough so that just like how there's many talks about how the Jews don't let anything get away from their 12 years of being the Holocaust, as far as the people, their ancestors. 12 years. And I look at that as being, now for 12 years, that can be times 36 plus maybe 6 years of the things that we've gone through in this country, this very country that we're in. I just look at the fact that
seriously, I don't have any problem with a bigger number.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because
okay, I have no problem whatsoever. You know, what we're arguing, and from here to equality, is that the 10 to 12 trillion dollars is the baseline. If people want to construct numbers that are larger because of the greater scope of the atrocities, you know, I don't have any problem with that. What I will say is that the 10 to 12 trillion dollars will mean that the average Black household, even that all Black households, because our idea is that we give a uniform amount to every eligible recipient. So all Black households would have somewhere in the vicinity of an $840,000 in additional wealth. And I think that would be hugely transformative. It would mean that the middle Black household would have significantly more wealth than the middle white household, which is, I think, going to be one of the points of resistance that we're going to encounter in terms of doing this. But you know, it would not put us in some sense on some sort of even footing, because it would create a situation in which the average Black household would actually have significantly more resources than the average white household. Okay. At the middle of the distribution. Yeah.
Because we had the and see one. Are you familiar with the HR 40, the hearings that had in the past month? I think last part of February, the HR 40 hearings.
Yeah.
Okay. I heard a lot of talk from, and I would say you had the educated righteous versus the educated fools. I'm just going to be frank. And there's a lady that was on there. She was a part of the Japanese Americans, Kathy Masaoka. She pretty much advocated way more for our own people in this country than those that are of the lineage.
No, and absolutely right. She probably made the strongest statement on behalf of our case for reparations.
So, and see, with that in mind, it just makes me feel like, you know, what are people missing that don't get it? And I'm not going to have to mention, well, I guess mention Herschel Walker and some other names, the elder, but you know,
well, there are at least two ways of not getting it. One way is being opposed to reparations outright, like a Herschel Walker. The other way of not getting it is to think about constructing a particular approach to reparations that really won't meet our needs, that won't be true reparations. And so I think that both of those sides are actually creating obstacles to reparations. And as you pointed out, the woman who was representing the Japanese American Citizens League actually made the strongest statement among those who were in favor of reparations in the whole hearing. The other thing that I'll say is an issue with that hearing, and the same issue that arose in the Juneteenth hearing in 2019, is that there is no discussion in these conversations about the actual content of the legislation, HR 40 itself. Everybody comes in and says, well, I'm for reparations or I'm against it, but nobody talks about the specifics of the bill that the hearing is ostensibly supposed to be held about. And that bill is problematic. Yeah, that bill will not give us true reparations. It's designed in a way to be a deflection. And so, I also find it interesting that they've had 2 hearings about this bill, and I think the only person who ever said anything about the content of the bill was me.
Right.
In 2019, when I was asked to submit testimony and I couldn't attend the hearing, so I submitted written testimony, which is in the record. And I think it was only my comments that made any reference to the specifics of the bill.
So, but see, why would you think that with your academia, why wouldn't have you been chosen to be on the panel to speak? I mean, Representative Schuett.
I can only get in trouble if I try to speculate on this one, so I'm not going to.
Okay. Well, all right. Okay, I can understand. It just makes me just wonder about, why wouldn't other people that have a little more say so or study, even in the ADOS, that can really give some great numbers or some great rationale for the subject matter, because it becomes too much of this is the original sin, or this is the sin that started it all. Okay, so what you gonna do about it to change it, instead of just keep talking about it, showcasing it? It becomes like people they have this thing of talking about the United States is the most powerful country. The United States is the most wealthiest country. Okay, so how did all that happen? How did all that become? And why are there people still wanting to come to this country? Like, many ethnics still want to come to this country. And it bothers me, because you wonder, are these people in the same, are they in the same field to really want things better for the people that have been originally here? Or do they even care about that? And,
Kirsten Mullen and I've said a number of times that if you migrate to a country, you migrate to its history and its responsibilities. And I think that many recent immigrants have not really done a careful examination of how America came to be what it is today. They just see what they perceive to be as the fruits of those processes, and obviously want to benefit. But I think it becomes very, very important for them to actually have an awareness of how America came to be what it is, and where these fruits that they are seeking actually came from. There's another aspect of the reparations plan that we put forward, besides the payments, which is an educational dimension, which is to provide a curriculum and instruction program that would last for at least 3 generations, that would reconstruct and provide an accurate history of, in particular, of slavery, the Civil War, and the Reconstruction era, and then, of course, the period thereafter. But we think it's really, really important for people to actually be informed. And we think that many recent immigrants coming to the United States, really are grossly misinformed about the American experience. And I think that affects their perspective once they when they arrive.
Because I've talked to one of in our groups. We were talking about one of the things that may have come about in this country with paper genocide, and we was looking at how you spoke about the pre-1950s, about paperwork or just documentations for the lineage aspect or to identify.
Yeah, well, I mistakenly floated a proposal that I hadn't fully developed on the internet, and it caused a firestorm.
Right.
So I'm for the time being, I'm standing by the original criteria that we talked about concerning who would be eligible. And so, yeah, the first standard is an individual would have to demonstrate that they had at least one ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. And that's the issue that some people say would be very difficult for some folks to establish. I'm not convinced that it would be an intractable problem, particularly if the federal government provided a service or an agency that consisted of genealogical experts who would provide that kind of guidance and information to individuals at no cost to the claimant. So I think that's something that can be done, but I was speculating that under circumstances in which it might be impossible for individuals to demonstrate their eligibility, that if we used a softer criteria, that we could be assured of including all of the folks who had ancestors who were enslaved in the United States without opening the floodgates. But some folks felt that would indeed open the floodgates. So I've backed off of that.
But see, you know what? And see, this is something that I spoke to. I think I spoke to Tiffany about this. About how there are a lot of our lineage of children are in foster care. Foster care. They don't have their parents. Now, think about how many foster children already.
I presume though that they do have birth certificates.
Yeah, they got birth certificate. But see, what if
that would be your starting point for trying to establish their lineage, is the information that would be on the birth certificate. So, or if a Black kid is adopted by a family that has established their lineage, from my perspective, an adopted child would count as being eligible also. So I'm not sure that the foster care system really is a barrier.
But like even with the foster children, they may be adopted by quote unquote white people, or somebody will want to pick them up either before or after everything is said and done. Do you think that will be an inhibitor, or what would
Yeah, I don't know. That's a fair question. I'm not sure. I think that if a child has proof of parentage in a birth certificate that indicates that they have a lineage connection to folks who were enslaved in the United States, then I don't think it matters then if they were adopted by somebody white. I was thinking of a reverse circumstance in which it would be difficult for a Black child, for whatever reason, to establish their lineage, and they got adopted by a Black family. In that case, I would view them as fully eligible also. But for the kids who got adopted by non-Black families, then it would be contingent on them being able to establish their lineage. I think we would want to err on the side of inclusion rather than exclusion. And I also think that it probably would be essential to have some kind of, some kind of agency or board that would have the responsibility for evaluating the cases that appear to be, most ambiguous. That people should be able to make claims, and then there should be some process for assessing the quality of their claims, even if they are not able to provide all the documentation that's required.
Yeah, because that's another thing about documentation, with paper genocide. I think I said this to a few about we need to start getting our documents as far as from going back to 1870. But would that be a roadblock that far back. Because I know that I have a picture of my great great granddaddy. I look just like him with the nose and bald head, but he goes back to maybe 1900s.
So
Or,
let me say this, and I don't know if this will address your concern, but if you can demonstrate that you have an ancestor who was listed in the 1870 census,
right.
and that ancestor was old enough to have been enslaved,
Mm-hmm.
if they do not appear in the 1860 census, then that is a signal, because of the paper genocide process, that they were enslaved. So we can use their absence from the 1860 census as evidence that they were exposed or they were born into slavery.
Dr. Darity, this is Tiffany Hooker. I
Yes.
wanted to ask, for people who are just now getting this information, what is the age, what's the cutoff age by 1860 that they
So
need?
if somebody is in the 1870 census,
Yes, I'm in 1870.
if
Yes.
they're in the 1870 census, they would have had to have been, if they were old enough to have been born into slavery and to be counted in the 1860 census, then they would have to be at least 11 or 12 years of age.
Got it. That's for people who don't know. So they
Because the census for non-enslaved households listed every household member.
right. So I also, in regards to foster children, specifically kids who are fostered and adopted by non-Black families, even by Black families, what types of protections are going to be put into this reparations bill in order to protect their monetary lineage? I don't know, requirements.
So
Money they're
the
gonna get.
payments would go to all eligible recipients, but for folks who were less than 18 years of age, they would be held into a trust account until they reach maturity.
Excellent.
Yeah. So no other individual could access their funds, prior to the point at which they are specifically designated for the recipient to use.
Not even through death.
No. Well, no. That's an interesting question. I mean, I've always thought that one of the powerful dimensions of possessing wealth is your capacity to endow it on others. But I think an individual would have to be an adult before they would have the capacity to transfer the funds to somebody else on their death.
So let's take, for example, you might be an ADOS child. Well, there are lots of ADOS children who are in foster care and who also have children themselves. So if something was to happen to them, then it will pass on to their children, even though they're technically considered to be minors. But it would
That's
not.
right. But again, it would be held in a trust until the minors reach young adulthood. Yeah.
So then that means that white supremacists can't just go and adopt or foster Black ADOS
And get access to the money?
to
No.
get access to money.
No.
That's the question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Rodney. Tiffany, unmute. Rodney, you had a question.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Darity. Pleasure to speak to you.
Hi.
Okay, I'm former Internal Revenue Service. I was also a product of Wilson County High School. I graduated from Wilson Pike in Wilson, North Carolina, currently at Atlanta, Georgia.
And my mother's from Wilson. My mother was from Wilson.
Yeah, I remember that. I saw that.
Yeah,
so powerful. Quick question, great one. What's your confidence, number one, in Sheila Jackson Lee to she's inherited this charge with HR 40? What's your confidence personally in her, and also your thoughts on it? Like we had the failed, unfortunately, Freedmen's Bureau, like a Reparations Bureau. What's your thoughts on that to sort out these type of detailed issues? Part 3, I know Durham is doing great work with the City Council with reparations. I want you to expand on your you know, thoughts on what y'all doing in Durham, the city reparations, and so we can have some strategy. And I appreciate hearing your wisdom on those topics. Sheila Jackson Lee's confidence in her. Once again, City of Durham, and then type of Freedom Part 2 Bureau, Freedom's Bureau, reparations.
So, you know, the first question, I don't believe there's any evidence that Sheila Jackson Lee has pushed forward for what I would refer to as true reparations. And the fact that she continues to promote HR 40 without any effort to examine its content and revise or replace it suggests that you know, she's not somebody I can view in the present moment as an ally. You know, maybe that will change, but at the present moment, no. With respect to the Durham City Council's resolution, it's one that I actually like a great deal because it does not call for Durham to have its own reparations plan. It actually calls for the Durham City Council to endorse a reparations plan at the federal level, and a reparations plan with 3 characteristics. First, the eligibility of the recipients would be contingent on them being Black American descendants of US slavery. That second, the federal plan should eliminate the racial wealth gap. And third, that the federal plan should involve direct payments to eligible recipients. And so that's all in the City Council's resolution. That's what they are endorsing at the federal level. What they are doing locally is what they refer to as racial equity initiatives, not reparations. And I think this is really important. And so I think that the Durham resolution is a model that might be useful for other communities to pursue. The third question you raised, please remind me.
The Bureau, like the Freedom's Bureau, a Reparations Bureau.
Yeah. we actually talk about something that we're calling a reparations bureau in the last chapter of our book. And I don't know if the question that you're raising is whether or not we can ensure that that's going to be effective, given the way in which the original Freedmen's Bureau was subverted. But I think that at minimum, we're aware of what happened in the past. And so we can do our best to try to make sure that there are legal provisions that would ensure that this new bureau that is supposed to execute the reparations program is most effective. We can't guarantee it. It's something that we have to execute politically. I think if we got to a stage at which the US Congress would actually pass a reparations plan, a true reparations plan, then we'd also be at a stage in which the US Congress would be receptive to trying to establish conditions in the law that would be protective of that agency's operations.
Could you serve as the czar of that agency?
Oh, absolutely not. Man, I'm old and tired. Well, that would be one of the most challenging jobs I could imagine.
Appreciate your work. Absolutely love you, man. Thank you so much for the financial, political education. Thank you. And God bless your work. I love you and your wife. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Darity. It's David talking to you.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. So my question will lead more to, I know in the past, you kind of just cleared a few things up for me, but I still want to touch on who is Ahmed Noor. We need to get him out of here. So As far as state reparations go, I know you say you were kind of against that. I was looking at the California bill, and you kind of just, like I said, you kind of just cleared that up and said those are more racial equity plans. But when you look at, I guess, the 13 original colonies or the southern states where most of the slavery was taking place, like what would you say to those states that actually want to come up with a actual state sponsored bill, like if they're actually serious about it? And is there a way that a state bill can be done without undermining national reparations? Because like some of the figures I've looked at for the southern states with the different cash crops, cotton, sugar, tobacco, a lot of the Confederate strongholds were in the South, and a lot of that wealth is concentrated, I mean, in the South, but it kind of, moved out. But like, what would you, if a state wanted to do a state bill, like what would be a good measuring stick or a good guideline to go by without it undermining, nationally?
So the question you raise about undermining is really, really important. And this is what makes me very nervous about state or municipal level so-called reparations initiatives, that as we try to push forward with a national program, that there may be a tendency for folks who are opposed to reparations to say, well, you've already got it. It's been done in a number of states. It's been done in a number of towns like Asheville, North Carolina, or Evanston, Illinois, and the like. And so there's no reason to do it at the federal level. And I think that the companion issue is the fact that states and municipalities they literally cannot meet the bill. So if you start with what I'm viewing as a baseline figure of what's required to eliminate the racial wealth gulf of 10 to 12 trillion dollars, it's important to note that if you took all the state and local governments throughout the United States and combined their budgets, their total budgets would amount to $3.1 trillion. So even if you devoted all of that to a reparations plan in a given year, you would fall $7 trillion short of what is required for the full reparations bill at its minimum. And in addition, if that full amount was devoted to the reparations project, states and localities could not perform their normal services at all because they would have no budgetary capacity to do so. So I think it's somewhat misleading to refer to any type of initiative that state or local governments take as if they're reparations. Now, is there a principle involved because there are certain regions of the country that disproportionately benefited from the various atrocities? Well, it's really the federal government that created the legal and authority framework that permitted slavery to be practiced anywhere in the United States. It's the federal government that permitted 100 years of legal segregation in the United States. It's the federal government that took no action against the waves of massacres that took place between the end of the Civil War and the 1940s. So as a consequence, it's the federal government that has to be viewed as the culpable party and has to bear the responsibility. One final point, the impact of the system of slavery was nationwide, particularly in the context of the economic development of New England and the Mid-Atlantic states. The city of New York was really a city that was built on the back of cotton. The cotton textile industry was, the manufacturing activity was all in the North, and it was based upon slave-grown cotton. And so there was a national impact for United States economic development that was associated with the system of slavery. And so again, it means that the federal government's the culpable party.
Okay, so I had a couple more questions. So your book is called From Here to Equality. Um, so if we're going to equality, what in your mind, what does equality look like, and and do you believe that pure or true reparations will actually bring about equality? And what does in an expert's mind, what does equality actually look like in modern day this century? I I really I'm kind of puzzled on how to ask that question. But in your professional opinion, like what does equality really look like, or what would be your dream vision of when you close the racial wealth gap? How would equality work, or what would be the makeup of how that looks, or that transformation?
Well, the premise in the plan that we've put forward is that uh, payments would be distributed to individual eligible recipients, some of whom will be members of households where there may be a possibility of merging or combining resources. If we think about the Japanese American reparations, entire families were subjected to mass incarceration. And so when people hear that there were $20,000 payments to individuals, they overlook the fact that in many cases, those individuals were parts of families that might have had 4 or 5 members, all of whom would be eligible to have received the payments. And so then you're talking about in 1988 dollars, something along the order of a $100,000 or $80,000 payment, which translates into something in the vicinity of $400,000 to $500,000 today. So these are not trivial payments. And if we think about what would happen in the context of Black American families, as I said, if we're thinking about households in particular, we're talking about an additional net worth of $840,000 that would be added to the wealth position of all of these households. And so then what would be the consequences? The consequences would be dependent upon what those individuals and households chose to do with the funds themselves, whether they wanted to expand an existing business or start a new business, if they wanted to put the funds towards additional education, if they wanted to put the funds into retirement pensions, if they wanted to put the funds into the purchases of financial assets. I think we tend to romanticize.
In a minute, okay?
I think we tend to romanticize home ownership, but that's another possible use of the funds. And so I think, the consequences in terms of what would happen to the economic profile of the average Black family would be in large measure dependent upon what the Black family chose to do with the resources that they were given. But the key thing is that they merit those resources because of the way in which American society has engaged in atrocities against the Black community. And they should have full opportunity to decide how they would like to best use those funds.
But Dr. Darity, one of the things that I've engaged in for many years ago is like the wording of things, and I noticed that you have pure reparations, and I've seen this quite a bit in our community that we have the term reparationist. Now, I've seen, I think in the closing of the year of last year, 2020, even like now, 2020, 2021, Laura Gomez. Now, she is Hispanic from out of UCLA. She's a law professor. It seems like she's now either piggybacking or getting into the ballpark of speaking about reparations, not for native blacks of the USA, but for Hispanics. And she knows very well about the talks in this country that has amounted to Native Blacks receiving or in demand for reparations in the United States. But now she wants to be considered for reparations. For what reason? I really don't know. But when you say reparation it's like you, not say you, I'm saying, but when that term reparations is used, it's like it kind of like falls in line with anybody could be, you're supposed to be an advocate for anybody that wants reparations. And then like somebody like Laura Gomez, she's pretty much putting a strong hold onto that for Hispanics to receive reparations, which again, like I said, again, I don't see why. You came here voluntarily, not
Well,
by
yeah, I agree with you. That's a different case. And if they
right,
want to make it, that she's got every right to do that, but it's not the case we're talking about.
right.
The question with these terms is context. So
Mhm.
if you think about it, strictly speaking, ADOS refers to American descendants of slavery. It doesn't indicate that those individuals have to be Black, and it doesn't indicate that it's slavery in the United States, not ADOS itself. But we actually know that that is what is intended by the term. And so the term reparationist has arisen in the context of thinking about reparations for Black American descendants of US slavery. So there's a context, and I think the context gives us a sense that that's the applicability of the term. Now, whether or not Laura Gomez wants to develop a reparations plan for Latinos is another matter altogether. But it's not the subject of our conversation. I mean, any other group in the United States can make a claim if they want to. But I would encourage them to write their own book, okay? But they haven't done so yet. But thinking about terms, we also have to think about the context in which those terms are used.
Right. Rodney. Hold on, Rodney. Hold on, Rodney. Go to Rodney. Tiffany.
Okay, thank you again. Question, in writing your book, my background once again, being a tax accountant, did you use like actuaries and statisticians to come up with your figure? I'm a numbers person, so.
No. The only thing we used was we looked at what the magnitude is of the average difference in wealth between Black and white households, the mean difference rather than the median. And we use that as the basis for calculating how much would be required to eliminate the racial wealth gap. We also, somewhat intentionally did not try to rely upon the tax system as a mechanism for payment, although our thinking is that the funds that individuals receive under a reparations plan should be tax-free. Okay. But we didn't think about using the tax mechanism for the purposes of providing reparations because of two reasons. The first is that there are individuals whose incomes are too low for them to be required to pay any taxes. And so if you use the tax mechanism, they wouldn't get anything. Mm-hmm. And then the second reason is that the tax system is regressive. And so the individuals who are at the upper end of the income distribution would get more relative to those at the bottom. And we think it's important that a reparations plan have uniform payments for all eligible recipients.
Okay, thank you.
Up next, we have Keith.
How you doing, Dr. Darity? I have a question. I was wondering your opinions on a federal job guarantee and how that will, obviously it won't be reparations. I wouldn't count that as reparations.
No, it's not.
I think that would, but I know sometimes you have certain policies that you think are like stopgaps or just certain things that will like aid us on the road to reparations. I was on your opinions on federal jobs guarantee, how that could help us on the road to reparations.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that the federal job guarantee would help us on the road to reparations unless, it was part of a package of policies that were put into place at the same time as the reparations plan, where this other package of policies that would include the federal job guarantee would be a package that's for all Americans, while reparations is specific to Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. And that package I have called an economic bill of rights for the 21st century. So it includes a job guarantee. It includes the provision of national health insurance for all Americans. It includes a guarantee of quality housing for everyone. And it includes the provision of certain types of financial services on a non-predatory basis. So we could have public banking or a postal banking system to provide client services to American citizens, particularly those whose incomes and resources are so low that the private banking system really doesn't want to deal with them at all, or and pushes them into the hands of predatory lenders. And so that's something that we could do for every American. Some of these things might have a greater benefit for Black Americans, relatively speaking, but none of these steps would eliminate the racial wealth gap. And that's why we would still need a reparations plan. Now, if having that initial economic bill of rights for all Americans, if introducing that at the same time that you introduced a reparations plan kind of ease the way for more and more Americans to support the reparations plan, then that's all good. I'm just not certain. I don't know enough about how you craft political attitudes in this country to make sure that that would be the case. But I'm in favor of both reparations and an economic bill of rights for all Americans.
I would love to see this to be a course book that you could develop, like at the college level, like historical Black colleges, because your work is so powerful, and to get like the up and coming minds more activated. How can we get our families involved in North Carolina and all those historical Black colleges? Some type of coursework that can be done to expand your powerful work.
Wow, that's pretty generous. I mean, I hope that our work can provide that type of purpose. Maybe it would be necessary for us to have some other vehicles for presenting the material that would be accessible to folks. I've long had this dream. Kirsten Mullen definitely would love to have a version of the book that was written for adolescents. I think we both have wanted to see if there was some way to translate this into a video that could be easily circulated that might provide people with a lot of this information. But I think we also hope that this is also an inspiration for others to extend the research, because our book is not the end all and be all. We hope it's a helpful foundation, but there's so many of you out there who are talented, who are thinking about these issues now, who can augment the research and database that we've been trying to develop for our book, that we can make the movement work.
Dr. Darity, this is Joanne. Thank you for all your information. I have a question, and I want to go back just a bit, because David was talking about basically the census, and based on the census, who kind of qualifies for reparations, right? So there are a lot of us who may not qualify if based on what was said. And I just need to have a clarification to understand that I heard you correctly. you said that the census back in what, 1860,
Right.
right? Um, for the descendants of slaves generally did not have or list all the members of a family. Is that right?
They did not have a list of individuals who were enslaved, not in the 1860
Oh,
census.
enslaved. Okay.
That's right.
So we have to look at the
So if
enslaved part.
somebody was old enough to have been enslaved and appears in the 1870 census, but
Mhm.
does not in the 1860 census, then that's prima facie evidence that they probably were enslaved.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what I was trying to say is that their absence in the 1860 census is evidence that could be used to support somebody's attempt to register their claim.
Okay, cool. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you. Everybody, all the other people asked all my questions basically, so I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have about 10 more minutes.
Yes, we had two more questions, one from David and one from Keith. So
Okay.
I'll just ask David to unmute.
I'm trying to unmute on the other.
Come on to the other person.
All right, can I talk now?
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Okay. Dr. Darity. I'd like to ask basically. I remember a stat that says like was it like the amount of Black immigrants in America was like was it less than 1%? I was wondering
Prior to,
prior to
the 1960s.
Yeah. I was wondering like how effective would it be as like the, because obviously like most, like for any stat, if you have a error rate of less than 1%, that's pretty decent, you know. So I was wondering, what if we made the criteria like you can trace your ancestor to someone who's an American citizen, probably classified as Negro prior to 1965 Immigration Act, and cross-reference that with immigration roles at that time during that time period. Would that not be like an accurate way of basically defining who is ADOS?
Well, when I got into trouble, I was proposing something exactly like that, which is to you know, some sort of procedure where you would have to establish that you had at least two ancestors who were Black living in the United States prior to 1950. You know, that's essentially what you're describing. And the idea there was that there was such a small proportion of the Black population that was an immigrant population at that time that you would have made it much easier for everyone else to establish their eligibility. You know, I think that people felt that a lot of the reaction I got suggested that people felt that there was a principle involved. And so even though there was a very small number of people who would be rendered eligible as a consequence, they weren't particularly enthusiastic about doing that. But that was the idea.
Hello, Dr. Darity.
Hello.
Hey, this is Josh.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Happy to have you on the Zoom. Always enjoying your wisdom coming from spaces, you know, being a reparationist. But my question is, you know, I've been going back and looking over just a lot of the post-Civil War information and bills that were proposed man, so this is eye-opening stuff. And I was wondering, what would you, what are your thoughts when we think about maybe reinstituting or having some new iteration of a Freedmen's Bureau or something to that extent, where we have an agency under, under the executive branch that's directly dealing with our issues, and this, establishes, the descendants of freedmen, or those people whose ancestors were enslaved, as like a separate group. Because a lot of times I look at the rebuttals that come from people that they're anti-reparationists, and they come from the standpoint of, well, it would be unconstitutional. You can't make race-based. You can't make such policies that are discriminatory and things like that. And I look at, when you look at that time period after the war, when they were doing things, particularly for the freedmen, they were designated as a separate group. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was pretty straightforward to designate the freedmen as a separate group because these were people who had been exposed to slavery. And so your criteria for treating them as a separate group was not necessarily race per se, but it was whether or not individuals had emerged from being enslaved. So in a similar vein, the kind of criteria that we're advancing now are contingent on a connection to individuals who were enslaved in the US, and also self-identification on the census. And so, we're actually using a formal census category, the race question, as a basis for determining who's eligible. But with respect to the question of having a bureau that is specifically designated to treat the interest of this community, we actually use the language in our book. We use the language of a reparations bureau because we took that from the Freedmen's Bureau language. So, definitely think that a reparations bureau or its equivalent should have that type of responsibility.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Darity. What bureau would you say that? I mean, what department do you think it should be, like a standalone department, or do you think it should be under a certain department in the executive branch?
I'm not sure what's the best procedure, but I'm thinking that it might be best if it's a standalone. I'm not sure where you'd locate it. Would you put it in the Department of Interior, like like all of the programs for Native Americans? I'm not sure that's the best place for it. Definitely don't want it to be under Department of Education or Department of Housing and Urban Development per se either, because I think that sends the wrong message. So yeah, maybe it should just be a standalone agency.
Tiffany, does David want to ask a question, or want to end it off, or?
Yeah, it's on you, because
Yeah.
it's 2:07.
Okay. Well, let's let David get in real quick, and we'll go ahead, David. See if he can unmute David.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, so hey, Dr. Darity, my other question was related to Joe Biden had made some statements in an interview, President Biden, about, like, he actually said, he was like, well, I'm not gonna go back 300 years and try to hold anybody accountable, or it was something to that nature about going back 300 years is something that he doesn't want to do. But with all the data that you compile, over the years, and I, I I'm trying to see if we could. I don't understand how he could be claimed to be in support of a HR 40 study per se, but has already said that he's not going back 300 years to. But you have to do that in order to complete the study or do a genuine study on that. So I I we need people at the table that are gonna ask him that question and remind him of what he said to try to, gain more clarity on actually going back to 300 or 400 years, because we do have to compile that data. And I was wondering if would it be effective on the state level to like reach out to those state senators and see if like what would be your top two questions in if we had to deliver, I ain't gonna say a list of demands, but a possibly inviting state senators and House reps to do more reparations talks as it alludes to HR 40, because it does have to be revised. So is that a possibility where we could put um, potential admins or proposals to state senators and state house reps to get them to add these admins to HR 40? Is that a process that's doable, or do you think like how would we get that to the federal level to get admins done to HR 40?
So I think, if you want amendments to HR 40, it's got to be something that is executed by members of Congress themselves. Now, whether or not our state representatives can have an effect, or whether they can exercise some leverage on congressional representatives, is another matter. And I think they probably can. So that might be an excellent strategy for trying to put pressure on them to alter what they're doing with respect to HR 40. I also think that your point about the historical record, going back 300 years, or I guess technically in terms of the history of the United States, we're really talking about 245 years. But the point's well taken, that we do have to go back in time to unpackage what the record of atrocities really has been. That makes the case for reparations. And so that kind of data could be data that is collected at the state and local level for consolidating the national case. It's become apparent that the state of California, for example, most Californians don't realize that slavery was actually practiced in their state, because technically the state of California comes into the Union, I believe, as a free state, but slavery was actually practiced there. And so the state of Oregon is one in which it was essentially a sundown state, where they had legislation that excluded the Negro from coming into the state, that it was illegal for Black people to be in Oregon. And so this reinforces the importance of treating reparations as a national program, because if Oregon sets up a reparations plan of its own and tries to administer it to the folks who are currently living in Oregon, it doesn't address the fact that there was some significant number of Black people who never moved into Oregon because of the past laws. So there's a host of factors that come into play, in which the data that could be gathered at the state and local level could be useful for building the federal case. And then, as you propose, perhaps these representatives at the state and local level could begin to put pressure on the federal government. I mean, this is the motivation behind the Durham resolution, is for the city of Durham to be part of a coalition that would lobby and petition Congress for a national reparations program.
And one more, and then I'll be done. I forget the lady's name, but there was a lady who individually sued for reparations back in the day, and she won.
I'm not sure.
I can't.
How far back are you talking?
I think it was post Civil War. I can't remember her name. I should have had it written down here, but
there are 3 or 4 cases where individuals did win reparations payments for themselves.
Right.
Yeah,
so how does that look different today? Like how is there a difference now versus, I know the times change, but
well, you know, we can't individually sue for reparations for being enslaved ourselves.
No, I mean like on like say like the county level, like once you identify the slave plantations that exist per county, like there's going to be a certain amount of families who are connected to that slave economic base per county. I'm thinking like say if you were to sue on the local level, would it have to be like a class action suit for the people of that county, or is there just no way to do that?
There's a woman named Deidre Farmer Paleman who attempted to bring some lawsuits against a variety of corporations, particularly insurance companies, based upon their complicity with slavery, and the court system rejected her suits. And I think there were 2 factors that came into play. One is that they said that the statute of limitations had been exhausted. The second factor was that these organizations actually were engaged in highly immoral acts, but they were legal. And so the real issue is, what is the institution that's responsible for making these highly immoral acts legal? And ultimately, it's the United States Congress. And it's the United States Congress that you have to turn to if the courts are going to say that the statute of limitations has been exhausted, because the statute of limitations condition doesn't apply to congressional decisions. Congress can make amends at any point that it wants to for any event that took place under its jurisdiction and authority. And so we've just had a tendency to really focus on the federal government as the source of comprehensive reparations.
Well, with that in mind, I just want to thank Dr. Darity for coming out and being a part of us today. I really would hope and commend that this segment has brought us a little more closer to not so much of an end goal, but a goal that we can see that can at least show that we're healing. We're actually healing, because you know, you can get hit by a car or you can get stabbed with a stab wound, but it takes time. It takes time to get back on track and to get back to your humaneness. So just glad everybody came out and just had a time that we can really reflect on our lives, reflect on where we are and the state of the United States, and just start, you know, just keep up with our work. We all doing some work out here, so just keep up with that and make yourselves known, known and proud that, you know, we are in the shoes of our ancestors. We are in those shoes that they want to see happen for us at best. And we are at the lineage state of being those saviors of our lineage, because we're here to make it known that we're here to rectify and to represent all of them that came before us. So with that being said, I'm just glad. And thanks once again, Dr. Darity. Thank you very much for coming out.
Take care.
And that's it.
Thank you, everybody.